Just a reminder, if you have questions that you didn't get a chance to ask before we started this webinar, you can use either the chat function or you can use the Q&A, which should be in the bottom of your kind of Zoom portal there. And I'll be checking those, and so will the panelists, and we'll take time to answer any of those questions that we can. If something doesn't feel like it flows quite in the part of the conversation we're having, we can address specific questions at the end. So please keep those coming. It helps drive our conversation, and we want to make sure that we're answering questions that are relevant to you. So we'll give just another minute or two before we get started. I will say my teenage daughter threatened to get on this call and watch it. So we have to be careful about what we say.
It was a threat to be sure we didn't tell embarrassing stories about her.
Change my name too. Hold on a second. All right, let's go ahead and get started. And I'm sure we'll have additional participants jump on as we get rolling. So just by way of introduction, my name's Nate. I'm one of the pastors at Grace Church. And one of the things we've been trying to do this summer is hold these kind of webinars or panel discussions around topics that are particularly relevant or people have a lot of questions about. So we've done one on racism. We've talked about mental health. We've talked about processing grief. And tonight we're actually going to talk about what it looks like to head into the school year, either as a parent or an educator or as a student. Everything feels different right now than it did last fall. So what I'm going to start by doing is opening us up in prayer, and then I'll give the panelists a little space to introduce themselves. So why don't you pray with me? God, we believe that knowledge is a gift, and it is a gift that we want to steward well. We want to be lifelong students, and we want to be lifelong teachers. And so we just pray that in this time, you would give us opportunity to learn, give us opportunity to teach, and give us opportunities to carry those skills into the rest of our life. We invite you to be a part of this conversation, bringing peace and encouragement and confidence and challenge where necessary. So we give this time to you. For all these things in Jesus' name, amen. Amen. All right, so let's go ahead and get started, panelists. If you want to take a minute to introduce yourself, Amy Breza, you are a familiar face on the panel. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi everyone. I'm Amy Breza, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker. So I have quite a few years of experience working with children and adolescents. I'm also the Children's Ministry Director at Grace Ann Arbor, and I'm a parent. And so I'm also going to be virtually educating my child this fall. I have one going into 3rd grade, and then I have a preschooler who's 3.
Thanks, Amy. Glad to have you on here again. Let's go to the other Amy, Amy Kimball.
I'm Amy Kimball. I'm married to him. Oh, shoot. I guess that doesn't work on here. Nate. I'm married to Nate. And we have 4 kids. Our oldest is in college this year at Hope College in Holland, Michigan. And then we have 2 in high school and 1 in middle school. And our school experience has been homeschooling. So throughout, we have been a part of different learning communities within the homeschooling kind of sector. And was there something else you wanted me to say or introduce?
Yeah, I mean, you have a degree in elementary education. That's relevant.
I do have a teaching degree. My background is in education, K-8.
Awesome. Last but not least, Jimmy.
Hey everyone, I'm Jimmy Leonard. I've been going to Grace since January, so like right before all this pandemic thing started. And for work, I'm an online educator. So I teach English classes, and then I also tutor math, English, and test prep online. And I write grammar curriculum specifically for homeschool students. And we have a 2-year-old. So I'm used to the distraction of like a young toddler running in the background while trying to do work from home. So I can speak a little bit to that too. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, the concern about toddlers is one that we've heard pretty regularly. So I'm glad you have some relevant experience to share. So let's talk about what the three of you have heard. I know that at least in our family, we've had several people reach out saying, hey, school looks different. Can you offer us any advice for those of us that might be homeschooling for the first time? What are some of the concerns that people have been coming to you with? This is actually where you panelists would jump in case that wasn't.
Yeah, I was waiting to see you wanted to grab that first. I think it feels so general to say it like this, but just how is this going to work? You know, the different forms of that question. And, you know, depending on everybody's family situation, there's like what are we going to do if we have to figure out childcare during the day? Or what are we going to do if we have to go down to just one parent working? Or what are we going to do if we physically don't have space in our house to give these kids a quiet place to study? Or what are we going to do if we only have one laptop and the school's not providing it? So I think that's just a big concern, is how is this going to work?
Yeah, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unknowns.
Yeah, one thing go ahead, Amy.
Well, okay. I've heard some of my friends say that they're worried about maybe they have one student who's still in some sort of in-person learning environment for at least part of the week, and then some of the kids are all virtual depending on their ages and their schools. So there's like commuting for one student with many other kids or a couple other kids at home with a variety of Zoom calls. I've heard some of my friends say that they're really worried about keeping a really young child engaged in a Zoom call for any length of time. That seems pretty daunting. Those are a few of the things I've heard.
Yeah, I've definitely heard all of those, along with, what about social engagement for our kids or specials, those additional courses, the concern that there will only be a focus on core work. And so, how are they going to access these other specials? As well as, the working parent, what do we do if one or both parents have to be on a call at the same time our student needs to be on a call? Like, what does that look like? Or, an older one is on a call, but the younger one is trying to distract them. So yeah, it's just all of those extra concerns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know that for some parents, there's the concern about navigating, when am I a parent? When am I an educator? How do I draw those lines? How do I walk that line? And then even as Jimmy alluded to, like, what does our family look like come September in this new reality? So there's a ton of family dynamics that end up being, questions as well. What about, have you heard anything from perhaps students that are going to be engaging online or virtually for the first time, and what might some of their concerns be?
Well, I think there's a spectrum among students. I mean, on one end, there's some students who honestly are pretty excited about this. This is the kind of student who's always felt a little bit frustrated in the traditional classroom, and school's always felt long to them. And they love the idea of being able to work at their own pace and do things virtually and having a lot of free time throughout the day. And then, of course, there's the kind of student who just is really craving the interaction with friends, is craving the sports that aren't happening and the extracurriculars, and quite honestly doesn't have a great relationship with mom and dad, and just knows that the second mom or dad says anything about did you do your homework today, that's going to be an instant explosion. And then of course there's everything in between. And so I think it's important to recognize that even as we're giving some strategies, there isn't a one size fits all. This is something that the families really have to evaluate for themselves, because what works for me is not necessarily going to be what works for you, even if we're ultimately abiding by the same principles for the same goals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's a great point, Jimmy. Your point, we're talking about the concerns that people are kind of bringing to the table, but there's also a ton of opportunities. And so when we start talking about strategies, a lot of those are going to lean into like, hey, this is how this can actually be a positive experience. And this is something that a virtual learning environment or, some sort of a hybrid or homeschooling, this is something that it can do that a traditional classroom perhaps can't. So I hope that you as attendees find that encouraging as we put that out there. And again, I just want to put out there, if you have questions, please type them into the chat or in the Q&A, and we will do our best to answer those as we go. So let's talk about some strategies for, call it virtual learning, or some sort of a hybrid environment. What are some strategies that we can start to be thinking about, or that parents or even students can be aware of, that makes virtual learning go well? And I would say that I'm talking about virtual learning, but I would say even some families are considering just homeschooling, which is a little bit different than virtual learning. So I think that there are strategies. Well, we've talked about strategies that work for kind of a lot of those circumstances. So that's kind of where I want to start across the board.
I think one of the first things is just knowing what the expectations are of the school or program, curriculum that you'll be using. Really read through the materials that they're giving you. I know that there's still a lot of unanswered questions, and but each week we're getting a little bit more information. So just being sure to check emails from the teacher regularly, and ask any questions that you have directly to them, and just really build that connection with their educator early on, so that there's that one-way or two-way communication of what's going on with your student at home, and just understand what's available at the time.
Yeah. Jimmy, what are some of the things you tell your students to help them kind of maximize their learning experience?
Sure. Yeah. The word that comes to mind for me is just establishing a routine. And I think that's something that families really have to do together. Sometimes it's sort of built in for you. If you are doing a live Zoom call with a teacher, that's going to happen at a certain time of day. But depending on what learning options you're doing, or even if you're doing traditional homeschooling, there is that freedom of, I could do this at any point in time of the day. And I think that freedom is also a curse, because then it's kind of always hanging over you of like, when am I working? When am I with family? Even for parents, when am I teaching the kid? When am I being a parent to the kid? When are we doing something fun together? And so I think it's just really important to develop that routine, have a schedule. As weird as it sounds, the stereotype is that working from home is just being in your pajamas all day. I think it's really important to get dressed. This day is starting. We're doing something today. So, we can't just be in the lounge mode all day. We're going to get started. We're going to be productive. We have plans today. I think it's important to instill that and make sure things actually do get done.
Yeah, from a perspective of homeschooling, sometimes those lines are a little bit blurry, in a good way and a bad way, but I agree with you wholeheartedly that a schedule and having the kids know when they're starting, and is a great way to get the day going. With older kids, I think you have more flexibility to have them have a day that is less structured but still has boundaries to it. So it felt like for me, when our kids were really little, it was really important to have a lot more rigidity to the schedule than it feels to me now with middle school and high school students. We have a lot more flexibility for them than we do with little kids.
And I do think there's a benefit as families or parents or educators are getting started. It's a lot harder to bring structure if you started with none. Like if it's just like the Wild West and then you try to get a homework assignment in on time, that's a lot harder than saying, hey, we're going to start by having some really clear structures and boundaries in place. And as we prove capable, we start to take some of those off. And so, like Amy said, we started with lots of structure. And as our kids have gotten older, we find the freedom to have less structure. Let's talk a little bit about physical space. What type of physical space works well with a virtual learning environment?
I mean, one thing, this isn't really physical space, but this is like huge for one of my kids, is noise canceling headphones, like the big kind that just go right over his ears. He is so distractible. And in a home environment where you might have little kids and you have siblings and you have someone unloading the dishwasher, and all that stuff is happening. For my one son, having noise canceling headphones makes all the difference in the world for him being able to sit anywhere and do anything. I mean, he wears them even when he's not on like a call or something. He just needs that sort of mental protection. So that's like a physical space kind of thought.
Mm-hmm. Especially if you can't have a separate space.
Yeah.
They could go.
Yeah.
I saw this other really creative idea that's been floating around with a trifold board where the kids can decorate it and it stands on their desk. So for a kid who may be easily visually distracted, that might be something that they could set up on a table. It's easily portable, especially if they're using a dining room table or a shared space. They can tuck it away when they're done so that school can be over and they can tuck that away to get ready for a meal time.
Yeah, I love that idea. I think we all sort of have this ideal of like, we're going to have this completely dedicated school room, there's going to be desk and a whiteboard and stuff like that. And, some families are able to do that, but sometimes that's just not the reality. So I think whatever is possible in your home to have sort of that sacred space almost for getting the schoolwork done, and something really portable like a trifold works for a lot of families. I know for younger students, sometimes it's like your school stuff goes in a backpack or like in a cubby or in a tote. And like when we're doing school, go get your cubby. And there's just like some physical tie to I'm pulling this out because cubby has school stuff and we're associating it in that way. For older students, maybe it's just having a binder, where it's like, hey, your stuff's in the school binder and that's where school stuff goes. There's just some connection. It's not just all over the house.
That's great. The other thing that we've talked about in terms of this all working is giving yourself a tremendous amount of grace, regardless of what role you're in. If you're a student, a parent, an educator, some combination, or someone that's trying to support one of those, this is all brand new for lots of people, and we need to be able to give ourselves a tremendous amount of grace as we learn new habits and try new things and fail. Any strategies for giving yourself grace?
That sounds like such a theological question, right? It's so deep. I think like at an age appropriate level, it's important to talk with your kids about how this year is going to be different. I say age appropriate because it is going to be different with like high schoolers and elementary, but I think just establishing that of like, I don't really know what I'm doing either. We're all kind of figuring this out together, and I'm going to have some ideas. You're going to have some ideas, and maybe we'll try something for September, and on October 1st, we're going to try something different. And just sort of, building that into the framework, it almost seems counter to what I was saying about having a routine, but just sort of this built-in expectation of like, hey, we're just trying things. We're going to figure it out. Nobody really knows how to navigate school in 2020 because 2020 has never happened before. And, that in the Spanish flu pandemic in 1919, they handled things differently. They didn't have Zoom back then. So we don't really have a guidebook.
I think from my perspective of homeschooling for a number of years, it feels like every September, I sort of have all the schedules in place and all the time blocks set up, and all my expectations are really out there and high. And I have a lot planned for us to do. And it took me really years of homeschooling to get to a point where I would start the year with sort of a reasonable amount of things to accomplish in a day. And that's been years in learning for me. So it's tempting to get all this stuff really set up and be really kind of rigid about it and have all these expectations, and then realize like, September 23rd or whatever, that you're like, oh my gosh, we cannot do this. This is not sustainable. We're going to die if we continue on with my schedule. So if it's super helpful to not have that feel like a failure, to just sort of acknowledge that you are going to have to tweak this as you go. You will have to tweak it. That's part of being an at-home educator right now. So so learn from what you did and think about what's working and what's not working, and then rework it October 1st or sooner if you realize like what you set up is not really how your family functions, or oh my gosh, no one eats breakfast and loads a dishwasher that fast. Like whatever it was that you thought it was going to be like, and it's not, just let that stuff go and redo it, and then start again, and then redo it again if you have to redo it again.
I think another thing is also looking at what are the expectations. So what absolutely has to get done for school, like their attendance. How is attendance going to be counted? Will their assignments be considered late if it's turned in the next day? Like really understanding that, to almost understand that bare minimum, but then also set goals for, you know, how do we want to achieve educating this year? And so then if you fall somewhere in between, it's a comfortable place to be, because you know you're doing what absolutely you need to do, but you're also helping your students set goals and achieve things which are important.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. That's really good. Can we talk a little bit about scheduling? I mean, there's lots of different ways to schedule a day, but can we talk a little bit about what a schedule might look like for an elementary age student, or what it might look like for a middle schooler or a high schooler?
I mean, I can't speak to what like the time block should look like. Every family is so different in that regard, but one thing I will say about time blocking is that for some kids, it does not work. Maybe it was working better when they were in a classroom, but it might not work at home for them to sit at a desk and do what they were doing in school in the same way. It's their house. It's just not necessarily going to work like that. So I think that it's really useful to be able to say, like, we're going to do this for setting a timer at the table and say, we're going to work on this activity or this paper or this website, whatever it is, for a set amount of time. And then I'm going to have you go run around outside for however long you decide. And for my kids, or for some of my kids, having small blocks of time that they knew were going to be broken up with time doing something else they really wanted to do, whether that's sitting at the table and playing with Play-Doh or clay, or getting outside and getting into go on a walk. Or I mean, sometimes for one of our kids, it would just like doing a certain subject would like rise his frustration level to such a point that we were like, take a jog, go, like you need something like physical to almost like release the strain of that subject for you. And so we would plan that into his time. And there's no shame in that. You just kind of got to plan blocks for them to have almost release points for that kind of stuff.
I think Amy's point, Amy Breza's point about understanding the baseline is also really, really helpful on that front, because you as a parent, you have the freedom to say, for example, that's enough for today. Like, we didn't get everything done, but we've like hit the bottom like baseline, and we're gonna call that a win, and to feel good about that. You know, that's a real opportunity that being at home provides. What about as students get a little bit older, middle school, high school?
Well, I love the idea of basing it off of the timer. I think that's brilliant. You know, just saying like, you know, we're going to do math from 1 to 2 p.m. today. Like there's just so many ways that that's going to go wrong. But if instead you say we're going to work on math for 30 minutes, you know, then if you get started at 1:10 or 1:15, you can still get those 30 minutes in. And I think with older students too, it's important to remember how much distracted time there is in a typical high school day. I think the farther we get away from graduation, the more we forget. So you almost have to put yourself in that position of, remember when you were in school, in the middle of the day, you had passing time and you had lunch. And then while the teacher was talking, you had those 10 minutes where you were doodling in your notebook or whispering to your friend or just like completely not paying attention. And those things are completely, and it's what your high, and then we kind of rip them out of that context. And then we as parents expect them to be 100% attentive, working hard for 60 minutes straight on this workbook that we gave them. And of course that's not going to happen, because that's not what they did in school anyway. I don't think the human brain is wired to pay attention to anything for 60 minutes straight. And so just releasing yourself of that expectation of my student is going to be diligently working this entire time, because they won't be. And so, just kind of normalizing that, like, hey, finding some new music on your phone or like zoning out for a second, that's what kids do. And that's okay. If that's part of the 30 minutes, we're going to expect that. And it will just eliminate a lot of conflict between the student and the parent.
So
I think another thing that you can, sorry, let me add real quick. With all ages, I think one thing to also consider is where can you incorporate giving the child a choice? So there's so many things that are out of their hands right now. They feel very powerless about the situation. And so for instance, with Amy talking about like physical time, giving them that choice. Would you like to go for a jog or jump rope? Would you like to ride your bike or, walk the dog? Giving them options within that so that they feel like they have some control over that time. Same thing with the older kids, would you like to take a break to play on your phone or play a video game for the next 15 minutes, whatever that may be for them.
That's great. Jimmy, you had some thoughts about, and I think all the panelists did, about home economy as a part of scheduling your day. You want to talk about what that phrase means in this context?
Sure. So the home economy to me just means like works. So if a student is going to be at home more often than they normally would be, there's more opportunity to involve them in how the home works. So I think at age appropriate levels, of course, it's just really important to make sure that the student is involved in what's happening in the house, is a citizen of the house, and isn't just there kind of passively going through the motions that everybody else is doing around them. So delegating household chores, letting kids help with meals, when I say letting, like encouraging kids to help with meals and, whatever other things are happening in the house, I think is really important to share the load of that responsibility and not feel like everything is on the parent. And it also, like, I think it helps the kids normalize being at home too, because they're a part of the process.
Yeah, I think in some ways it's not a perfect analogy, but in some ways, like, you couldn't live the way you live on vacation all the time. And it's
right.
Like you can't, if you are used to your children leaving in the morning and coming home in the evening, you can't live your entire day the way those 2 blocks of time go. Like, something different is going to have to be in place. And I think home economy is one of the ways where you can kind of share the load a little bit. Amy, Kimball, you have thoughts about home economy?
I agree with what Jimmy said, and I think that it's sort of the upside of having our kids home is the opportunity to develop them in this way. It's a way that you don't normally get to develop them, or maybe not all the time when they're away as much as they might be. And so in this season, I think it's beneficial to think of it actually as a perk of having them at home, to say these are the things, like broadening your school perspective from simply academic goals to sort of larger life attainments, which are sort of things like, I really want you to be able to cook a meal and feel sort of the joy that it is to contribute to your family in that kind of way. And so for them, learning to do something like that can give them confidence. For our daughter, that was hugely significant in her life. When she was dyslexic, and so having a lot of frustration academically meant I had to come up with other ways in that time to help her feel self-confident. And for her, that turned out to be baking. And the girl can outbake me in the kitchen now at age 12, hands down, because it became the way that she learned to feel confident about herself. So there's some perks to using your home environment to encourage them, to give them self-confidence, to make them know that they're really appreciated. I mean, and then there's also the practical side of, if every single person is in the house all day, every day, you actually need help. Like, you can't really do all of that yourself. It's overwhelming, and you will it's not sustainable for you as a parent to feel like I'm gonna kind of serve all of you in this way all the time. They actually do really need to contribute for you guys to not go crazy, at least in my experience.
One of our attendees said that for her third grader in the spring, they used baking to help teach fractions, that it was useful on lots of levels in terms of a different way to do it, visualize the mathematical concept, and also doing something that helped the family. So that's another one of the benefits, is that you can use home economy or things that also help the family as a part of school. It can be integrated.
You can sort of take the vision that you have as a parent or as a couple or whatever, and say to your kids that it is like a way of kind of transferring your vision to the kids in terms of, like, for example, with the baking, like if you value hospitality, if you value connecting with your neighbors, turn that baking project into something that they walk across the street and leave with the older woman who lives across the street, or whatever. It's an opportunity. And so I think to see it as such, and to really even include it in your school thinking goals, like broaden those goals to things that you want to see in your kids grow that are outside of academics.
So a couple of really good questions coming through. One attendee said that the challenge for some of the families doing the A2 Connect option within Arbor schools is that the school sets the schedule, which matches the old school schedule. And so there isn't as much flexibility as we talk about with homeschooling. So what do you do in that kind of circumstance?
One thought that I had about this was almost preparing as if they're returning to school. So part of that is, which they are, even though it's going to look different, but, giving them the opportunity to, like we said, set up their school space, have their backpack ready, have their school supplies ready the night before, just as they would have done ordinarily, packing the lunches the night before so that when they're at home, the kids are just able to grab their lunch. That can still fit into the home economy, because maybe while you're making dinner, your child is preparing their lunch for the next day. And so there's still feeding into being able to help and be a part of the family, but it's preparing for what the next day has in store, because it will be a difficult schedule to stick through. But also being flexible with, the school may begin and realize this isn't working, just as the parent may set a schedule and say, this isn't working for us. So I think that's where it goes back to finding what the requirements are and then seeing where your wiggle room is for some of those things.
That's really good. Along with that, and then also another question that came through, one of our attendees was asking, can you talk about parents who may not be able to be as attentive to the student if they're working from home, etc.? What kind of things can you put in place if you're a working parent and suddenly you're also responsible for making sure that your kid gets school done on time? I want to talk about that, but something that ties the two of these things together that we've talked about is also the idea of a support network, not just children needing a support network, but that we as parents and educators need a support network as well. Does somebody want to tackle either one of those two issues?
Well, I think it partly depends on if you are doing a virtual school option through the public school, or if you're doing kind of the traditional homeschool. I would say for students who have a teacher and they're, supposed to be accountable to that teacher through the virtual school option, let them be accountable to the teacher. There is like a certain amount that's going to fall on the parent naturally of like trying to make sure that they're getting to school on time. But all of the things that you wouldn't normally remind them about during the school day, don't feel like you have to remind them about. If they're late to class, let it be the teacher's responsibility to say, why are you late to class today? If they do a bad job on the homework, like let the teacher say, you did a bad job on this homework. That's what would normally happen. And you can let that still happen. And then, for families who are doing more of a traditional homeschool, I think, you other panelists have some thoughts too, but it's just really important to make sure that it's not just one parent who is the only one overseeing all of the subjects. And there's a lot of different ways that can happen. I know as someone who teaches English online, I've been that person for some homeschool families before, where they just say things like, hey, can I have my son send you his essay? Just like as somebody else who reads it and gives him feedback, because he doesn't listen to me. Or, that's hard on their relationship. There's a lot of strain there of saying like, you need to do this better with your writing. And, that's something that I was agreeable to do, of just like, sure, I'll read it. I'll give him something to work on. So just finding who those people are in your network, I think, is really key to taking some of that burden off of yourself to be overseeing everything.
Yeah, that's a great point. One of the things that we've talked about, even as we head into this, is depending, and again, like Amy said, we homeschool, but our homeschool co-op, which functioned very much like high school for our kids, we weren't sure if it was going to meet. And so our backup plan was like, look, if this doesn't meet, we're going to form like a learning pod with like 2 or 3 other families, so that it doesn't solely fall on Amy or Amy and I to do it for our high schoolers. And so, if even in like the Ann Arbor Connect option, it's possible that you could find a couple other families that you feel comfortable with, and say, the kids go to school at this house on Tuesday, and everyone is at our house on Wednesday, and everyone is at this house on Thursday, to kind of like share the load of you not having to be the taskmaster every single day of the week for your student.
The community aspect of it, the other aspect of it, there's community for the students. There's also community for you as a parent that is essential, at least from my experience of doing educating from home. I feel like you have to have a couple people that understand, that you can be honest with, that you can tell them, this day is going so poorly. You have no idea how little we've gotten done. You have no idea how this day has gone. Like there are a few people for me like that I can really, that I can vent to. They're not my children, so that you can say, this is what I need help with, or can you pray for me today? This is really, this is not our best day. And having a community for you as a parent is essential as well. In addition to having community for your kids, which I've always thought, I've never wanted to homeschool in a vacuum, always needed a big community, because that's how I'm wired, and I know that's how kids learn well too. So.
Yeah, one of our attendees talked about the value of tutors.
Yes.
Again, we have absolutely done that. Even a subject that Amy is both qualified and able to teach and taught our other kids. If she hit a roadblock, we would bring someone in. There's plenty of college students that will, hop on, or there's professionals like Jimmy that you can just reach out to that will, again, take some of that burden from.
Or even like that's a super important point for me, is that my relationship with my kids was parent first, teacher second. And I'm not willing to sacrifice or sort of lose my relationship with them in the parent-child realm to be their teacher. So I would do just as Nate was saying, like if there is a particular subject matter that seems to be like a trigger for you and a child, even if it's a subject you can teach easily to a different child, or even if it's like your best subject and you have no idea why they don't want to listen to you about it, whatever it is, if it's a trigger subject for you and that child, just acknowledge that and decide that that's something you can outsource, even if it's outsourcing to your spouse, if it's outsourcing to grandma or grandpa, if it's outsourcing to a tutor, if it's outsourcing to someone online. Decide that you're not going to sacrifice your relationship with that child over a school subject. It's not worth it. And I know many homeschooling families that have chosen that. They choose their parent-child relationship and they say, this subject we'll do someone else with that.
Can we talk a little bit about how to manage virtual learning or teaching your kids at home when there's like really young kids in the house? I know that some of our families are experiencing that.
Yeah, so one strategy that is very effective is putting away some of the toys. Like for instance, we have a 3-year-old, and so putting away some of her favorite toys or specific activities um, in a closet, in a shelf, just so that they don't have regular use to it, and then pulling that down when it's time to unload the dishwasher, make dinner. Maybe our older student's going to be on a call, and so we want her to be engaged in activity and not bothering her sister. That's when we're going to pull down those activities so that she can sit there. It's new to her because she hasn't seen it in a few days, and can sit there and play with it in a fun way. Also, if I have a break between calls, that would be a time for me to be able to sit down and take a break from work and to engage her in an activity if I don't have anything pressing at home. So yeah, so those may be a few helpful things.
Jimmy, how do you deal with a 2-year-old when you're trying to teach?
Well, kind of like Amy was saying about outsourcing stuff, we outsource childcare. I'll just be honest about that. I know that, sometimes there's a financial aspect to that, but, if grandma can come watch him, grandma comes to watch him. And then, sometimes 1 or 2 days a week, we'll have somebody come over and, we'll pay a babysitter for a couple of hours just so we both can get our work done. And, I think those things are okay. It kind of goes back to that, like giving yourself grace sort of thing of like, I'll speak for myself. I think sometimes I feel like I'm a horrible dad because I have to do work. And I tell my 2-year-old that of like, I can't read you a book right now because I need to be working on this for the next 2 hours. And sometimes it feels really hard, and I'll just be honest, but I also know that if I don't finish this right now, it's going to bleed into everything else, and it's just going to make my whole day stressful. And so I have to do what I have to do to get this done right now. And so it's tricky. It is tricky, but just finding ways to make sure that coverage is there. And then actually, I think knowing yourself too. So like, for example, I'm a morning person. So I know that if there's something that I can be a little bit flexible with, like getting it done in the morning is just going to be more bang for my buck. If I say like, I'm going to work on this after the kids go to bed, I know myself. I know that that's not going to go well because I'm going to be really tired, and it's just not a good time to do that. So, if you have that flexibility with your job, I think maximizing your most productive time is really good too.
And I think you talk about outsourcing childcare, but that's another way where family partnerships can be really effective. Absolutely, if you can find another young family and it's like, hey, why don't I take the young kids for a couple hours here and you take the young kids? And again, COVID makes everything more complicated, but if you find a family that you feel safe with, if they're a neighbor or grandparents, that really can work, and it doesn't make you a bad parent. In fact, as you were saying, Jimmy, I think it makes you a very good parent. Amy, Kimball, do you have any other thoughts about navigating school with non-school age children in the mix?
No, we did what Amy Breza was suggesting when the kids were little, where we had specific things that they could only do, fun things that they could only do during school, which did really help. I also would really schedule, if you have the flexibility of scheduling, I would schedule things that are hard for you to focus on or them to focus on while toddler is napping, or when spouse is home and has a free hand. Like, don't set it up to be the kind of situation where like you're going to get frustrated, and they're going to get frustrated probably by the toddler that's in the room. So I did very purposefully try to leave some things for when I knew Nate would be available or when the baby would be sleeping, if you have that flexibility.
And I also remember that at various points we had set like play spaces that again were only for, if a child is 3 or 4, they can have activities at a desk or something, and that feels kind of like school time.
Yep.
That works as well. So we have a great question here from one of our attendees. Any thoughts on how to manage screen time if a student is watching all their classes and then their entertainment is online, and then they want to FaceTime with their friends. I mean, are our children just going to be on screens for 14 hours a day? What do we do?
I think this is an interesting time, right? Like normally would say get out and play or go over to so-and-so's house and, I'm going to drop the kids off at your house. But our children's social network is much smaller than we're used to it being. And so I think there's some flexibility there to say, if they're gaming and they're talking to them, it's still social for those older kids, and FaceTiming, it's still social. So I think the restrictions that we once had, they may have grown a little bit, but it's balancing out the educational aspect with the social aspect. Like this is important for their social development, especially our older kids. I mean, I never intended on having my 8-year-old texting, but I have her texting her cousins now and her grandparents because it's a form of communication. I never thought I would have allowed her doing that at a young age, but there's still a way to put, privacy restrictions, going through and allowing who can contact and who can't. There's ways to do it in a safe way, but still allow for social interaction.
I think that's a great point. That screen time can be qualitatively different. And one of the extra allowances that we give for our kids is if they are doing something together, if that includes a screen, that's not the same as them being off, like doing something by themselves on a screen. They're qualitatively different. And so I think having that conversation with your children about, hey, these fit in this category, and these are kind of here, and these are kind of here, and then putting boundaries. Again, I think these days they need to be looser than they were maybe a year ago, just because our lives are way more screen-centric than they ever were before. But you can kind of, quantify the different quality levels and say, this is okay and this has a limit. That's a great point.
One of the things as a mom that drives me personally nuts is being asked all day, like, when is my computer time, or can I play the computer now, or can I do this now? And so for us, the answer to that was having a set time of day. Like the answer is always no prior to like 4 p.m. Like, don't ask, just don't ask. It's yes, you can do the computer, but this is when you can do the computer. And they have a set amount of time they can do the computer for. I mean, computer meaning the game things they want to do, the entertainment. And in terms of what you guys were saying, I totally agree that some of their social interaction has to be on screens right now. It just has to be. And we tried to even dovetail some of that with school. For example, one of my kids had a subject that she really disliked, and her cousin disliked the same subject. So we would have them get on FaceTime and do that together twice a week or once a week. They would just call and do that subject together on FaceTime. And it alleviated a lot of emotional stress. It was one of those like emotionally stressful subjects that when they were together on FaceTime, they wouldn't melt down. But if they were each alone in their own house, that would be a meltdown subject. And so it was really helpful actually to have FaceTime for that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm probably a little biased because I work virtually a lot, but one of the things that I say is focusing on quality over quantity. I think sometimes we can get so stressed about how many minutes, a kid is in front of the screen, but just bringing that emphasis instead to what are they doing in front of the screen? Is this something that is educational? Is it something that's edifying? Is it something that is building them up socially, like a call with a family member? Or, is this something that really is just bringing their brain to mush? And there are differences for sure. I would say, like, if I had to give one like kind of firm recommendation, it would be not doing screen time right before bed. That just seems to be the thing that consistently psychologists say is really bad for sleep and, having that blue light right before bed. And so just like whatever you can do to like do something off screen before bedtime at all ages, I think is really important.
Yeah, one thing that we've always done as a family is that we've always had a massive, massive board game closet, because again, it's just a way that we, because like sometimes I don't really want to do what the kids are doing, but like a board game, yeah, we can do that. So finding ways to be off screen and interacting in a way that both enjoys. So we've had some people ask about kind of like this, and we're kind of already halfway there, but what about the social aspects of kids who maybe were going to school every day, or they were involved in sports or extracurriculars, and some of those things are gone? How do we navigate those spaces with our kids?
Like, how do we provide social interaction for them off screens? Is that kind of the question?
Yeah, or like, what do we do now that if sports are canceled? What is our responsibility as parents or as educators? How do we fill those times, or how do we meet those needs that were being met before? I mean, a lot of those things are gone.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we definitely touched on some of it earlier with, reaching out to family, having phone calls or messaging or playing virtual games together when going outside isn't an option. But one thing that I've noticed is we're getting to know our neighbors better. And I don't know if others are experiencing that, but we have met neighbors that have lived there for a couple of years, a block or two away, that we never really talked to before, but now we're able to do that, outdoors, socially distant, and be able to have conversations and exchanging phone numbers to say like, hey, you're going to be virtually learning this, fall too. Can we keep doing this? Can we talk through the fence, or can we go, play outside for a little bit in a safe way? And everyone else is in the same boat, so they're open to it. So I think looking for those opportunities in your surrounding community. Also for the kids who are hybrid learning and they're going into school a couple of days, connect with those parents. I mean, those are kids who they're already in their circle. They're interacting with them at school, and so those are potential friends outside of that. Like you mentioned before about maybe sharing some of those alternate days where they're virtually learning. They're already together at school those days, so maybe bringing them kind of into your circle as well for the days that they're virtually learning.
I think with older students, just as much as you can have a conversation with your student about what social interaction looks like to them and like how they want to be interacting with their friends, just because, let's be honest, there is a bit of a generational gap. The things that they talk about with their friends are just different than kids did 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And, I was talking with a family not too long ago who had a kid where they had a pretty firm family policy of no social media. They just decided like, this is something we're going to put the line down. We don't want our teenager on social media. And then through conversations, they found out that this student was actually feeling like she was really missing out because all of her friends were on this Google Hangout and they would talk about it, and she wanted to be a part of it, but she wasn't allowed to. And so that was one of those things where, again, like the family had to be a little bit flexible of saying like, hey, here's something that is really affecting our kid because they feel like they're not socializing. And maybe we could talk about what it looks like to be a little bit more flexible with that boundary and see if it'd be possible to let her partake in this. And so I think just asking kids like, hey, what have you heard your friends talking about? Kind of, so you need to be a little sneaky sometimes, like kind of come at it from the side, like, oh, what are kids at your school doing? And then, what they say might be the thing that they secretly want to do that they're like so afraid to ask you because they think you'll say no. And you might actually learn a lot just by asking those questions.
That's good. That's good. We've also found as homeschoolers that there are lots of extracurriculars. Even in times of COVID, there are dance studios, et cetera, that are doing things really safely. And in some cases, those opportunities can open up since there's less happening perhaps in the structured school environment. And so our kids have been involved in, sports leagues and dance and art and music. All those things are available. You just have to do a little bit of research, but there's lots of them that are available. So there's a note here from Amy Breza. Jimmy, can you share about passion projects in place of sports? I don't even remember what that is. And now I'm
Oh, yeah, I think that's something we were talking about in preparation for this. That, you know, we talked about like having kids bake, you know, like learn fractions and learn math through baking and things like that. But I think the question in a lot of parents' minds is like, okay, what if my kid doesn't like to bake or like doesn't like to cook? Like, is there like another option to have them do something? Yeah. You know, I like consuming baked goods more than actually making them. That's just me. But so I think that sometimes you need to think outside the box a little bit of just like, what would your kid be excited about? Maybe there's like some yard work that you've always wanted to do. A couple weeks ago, I like chopped down a bush that I'd hated for a long time and ripped it out of the ground. And it was like really physical and it felt really good to do it. Maybe there's something like that you know your kids would be excited about. Like, hey, like help me take down this tree or help me do this thing in our yard. I know one family who decided to help their daughter paint a mural in her room. And it was like this really serious project. Like they sketched it out, they made a plan, they got stencils, they taped it off. Like this was not a one afternoon thing. Like this took a long time for them to complete this mural. And so just being a little bit creative of what does my kid like to do and how could we do that around the house is just a lot of times a way to really get your kid excited about being at home, which is something that makes everything a lot easier if you can achieve it.
Yeah, that's great. Our daughters have discovered paint by number for adults this summer, as they haven't had the opportunity to be nearly as social, and they love it. They don't have an art class, but they spend hours creating these masterpieces that are essentially paint by number. So yeah, finding something that your kid really likes to do that isn't screen centric. I mean, it can be screen centric. Coding, you know, all those things are really great ways to engage kids' minds in community. One of our attendees says that their daughter loves sticker by number books and doing latch hook rugs. There's tons of opportunities. And again, give yourself some grace, like try some stuff. And if your kids don't love it, don't freak out. Don't force them to finish it necessarily. I mean, if you're trying to teach a skill, that's one thing. If you're trying to give them something that they enjoy, don't force them. Any other thoughts on passion projects, panelists?
Making videos. That's something a lot of students are really into right now. You know, obviously, if you're not comfortable like posting it on YouTube or whatever, that's your family's decision. But just making the video, I know, is something that a lot of middle schoolers will really get into. You know, it could be like a trick shot video like Dude Perfect does, or, you know, a music video, or just like a goofy skit that they write that they think is hilarious, even though you don't get it at all. Just like, you know, let them do it. And, you know, then they can learn from it too. You know, they can learn about editing and like these different things that are pretty real world skills. And it's something that can occupy them for days at a time.
Yeah. Even something as simple as a Rubik's Cube, which one of our attendees mentioned, like kids will spend hours on those. And something like a Rubik's Cube can be a great kind of carrot at the end of the stick, which is like, hey, once your math is done, you know, then you can do Rubik's Cube. But until then, we're just going to let it sit here. So all those things are great options. So I'm going to say we have a couple other topics that we want to cover, but we're going to start winding down. So if you have questions and you're watching, make sure to chat those in, and we will do our best to answer them. One of our attendees said start a business. I mean, absolutely. What a fantastic way to get a kid engaged in something. Even a teenager engaged in something that's kind of a little bit outside and is stretching and teaching them real life skills. That's a fantastic one. So Amy Breza, I wanted to make sure that we took a chance to talk about what students might be feeling in terms of this school year looking so different than it did last year, experiencing loss, grief, uncertainty. How do we navigate that emotional space with our kids?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's such a big topic that we actually took 2 other workshops to talk about anxiety and depression and grief. And in both of those workshops, we did touch on, you know, what this looks like in children and adolescents. So if you have a chance to go back and watch those, I think that would be helpful. But to build upon that for school, yeah, they are grieving, and they do have some worries about school starting. Some kids have anxiety and some worry regardless, whether they're returning to a school they've already been to, with other students that they know, you know, still have those jitters on the first day of school with their, you know, belly being upset, or, you know, not sure how it'll be different or what's going to be harder about it. So talking to your kids and finding out where they're at, I think, is important. You're going to see a range. Some kids, you may look at them and think, well, they're not even thinking about school yet. But it may come up in other behaviors and things that don't, you know, seem out of the norm for them. Like maybe they're not sleeping at night all of a sudden when they were great sleepers. So beginning to have those conversations with your kids, understanding that as a parent, we don't have all the answers right now, but being able to give them the answers to any of the questions that they have. And also, when we look at some of the ways to balance those emotions, giving them outlets. I think the passion projects are great ways to do that. Have them maybe talk or write about some of the worries or fears that they're having about school starting up. Getting active, so running outside and helping them to identify that, you know, that they're feeling a little worried and maybe they need to run it off or go for let's just stop what we're doing and go for a walk. You know, I think those are important things to take note of during the school year. And like Amy Kimball mentioned, really focusing on your relationship with your child, taking that time to connect with them, to find out where they're at with all of the changes that they may be experiencing. I mean, technology brings me frustration and stress, I would say multiple times a week, because all of a sudden my audio is not working, or my video cut out, or we just changed our Wi-Fi provider last week because it was like, we're not going to be able to manage in the school year. So kids are going to encounter some of those same things that get us frustrated, and recognizing that as a parent, you know, we can meet them where they're at. We can respond with empathy and compassion and understanding to say, like, hey, I know this is different. I know this is hard. You know, like what Jemmy was saying, you know, telling your kids, we'll get through this together. Like, we don't have all the answers, but I'm here for you, and let me know when you need me, and, you know, let's get through this together. It's different.
And we've talked about this in lots of different places, but I also wanted to kind of come back to a summary about what does self-care look like for us as parents, or, you know, or teachers, or parents/teachers, or, you know, maybe some of us are students, college students that are learning virtually. What does self-care look like for us?
Yeah, so for us, we're being aware, first and foremost, of where we're at, making sure we're taking care of our body and our relationship, our spiritual sides, you know, making sure we're taking time to connect and pray and read scripture and things that will help us feel grounded. That may be doing meditation or yoga, or, you know, a mindfulness walk, you know, just going for a walk and really experiencing all your senses, just taking those moments to ground yourself. Because as a parent, it's imperative that we take care of ourselves first and foremost. There's a lot we've talked about what we can do for our students, but the best thing that we can do is make sure that we are in a healthy space to be able to connect with them when they begin to struggle as well. Because as parents, we're going to be modeling that for them, and we're also going to be the one who listens to them and provides a bit of a sounding board when they struggle.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, it's true. You know, there's lots of jokes about like parents are so excited for the first day of school. for some parents, that's not going to look anything like it did in years past. And so being aware of what you're feeling and being aware of what you need and how it's different for you, not just for your child. Yeah, you can't live September the way perhaps you lived the summer, and you can't live September the way you did in 2019. It's just not going to work. Amy, Kimball, do you have any thoughts about self-care for homeschooling parents?
Just in addition to everything that Amy said, which was so good, is just, I don't know if this is an option for everyone, but for me at times, I would feel like our physical space was like closing in on me. Like we would be going for like a few weeks, and then it just felt like there was stuff everywhere, and laundry and dishes. And sometimes if you have the opportunity or the option of doing it, like saying like time out, if we don't like reset this physical space, like we're all struggling in it. So taking a half day or an afternoon or an evening or a Saturday or whatever, and saying like we're gonna reset this physical space so that we can be in it in peace again, actually contributed significantly to my ability to teach, or to even just be home, like in a peaceful sort of environment. Again, just since everybody's home all the time, it did feel significant to me in terms of self-care to say like we have to stop, and we have to like take care of some stuff, and then we can keep going.
And then Jimmy, how about for students who are in a place where they can, do their own self-care, whether it's high school, college, graduate school? What does that look like?
I think still making time for the things that you enjoy is really important. So, I like to run, so I try to still fit that into my day. It's great if I can run with someone, but even just by myself, trying to make sure I have that time to be outside and exercise. If it's like a particular sport that you like to watch, obviously a lot of those are getting canceled, but like if the NBA is your thing, it's like, okay to watch NBA games right now. It just like, again, just sort of like normalizing the, it's okay to do things that I want to do. And, if that's a way that you can talk about interests with people too, I think that's really important. The one other thing that I was going to say to you that I think has been really helpful for us is just not neglecting spiritual health too in the midst of all of this. So, my wife and I have tried to set aside like a couple nights a week where we pray together. We don't say every night because that's unrealistic, and we just know we're not going to stick to it. But we'll say like, okay, this week we're going to try for Tuesday and Thursday. We're going to find some time where we're going to pray together. And I think that's really helped me too, just kind of stay grounded in what's happening around me, because there are so many things that would be stressful for me otherwise.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's good. My Amy and I do try in the mornings to, like, before the kids get up, at least have a little bit of time where we sit together on the couch and, we're reading or praying individually or together. I think one of the other things that I would put out there is that in the same way that self-care, and in the same way that, your relationship with your kids is paramount, if you are married, that also can't take, second chair to your kids' education. It just can't. And so keeping that as a priority is also going to be super, super critical. One question that came in that I think we have a minute to address is, do you ever use music to create a peaceful atmosphere in or academic space?
We've used that really significantly. For me, one of the standards for them listening to music while doing school is that it has to be music without words. But with that being sort of the standard in our household, there's a lot of different genres that they've kind of exposed themselves to or found out about. And there's tons of different styles of music, from jazz to bluegrass to Brazilian to, classical, that you can put on that sort of create either an energized environment or a peaceful environment, but when they were little, we had music on almost all the time during school, something quiet in the background. And now they kind of opt for it in their headphones when they're working on something by themselves.
So, panelists, any final thoughts or any ground that we didn't cover specifically that you want to make sure you get out there? Any parting shots?
I think I just want to add that communication is key, especially if you're outsourcing some of the education aspects, whether that's a grandparent, spouse, communicating with the teacher. It's so imperative that everyone who's a part of the virtual learning with the student is just on the same page. In our family, we like to talk about it the week of, like what we have coming up that week, especially things that are out of the ordinary. But then we'll also review the next day, like that night, like, hey, just a reminder, I have a really important call at 10 a.m. and, Sarah's going to have to be on her call at this time. Like, it's just important to be on the same page about those things. And reminders are helpful to set in your phone.
Yeah, it's great. Communication.
One thing I was thinking about is I see someone who is a spiritual director, and one of the things that she has been teaching me and talking to me about is that when there are situations in my life or people in my life that I don't have a choice about, like they're going to be in my life or the situation is going to be in my life. She's asking me the question, what is God saying to you through this circumstance or through this person? Since it's something you cannot choose and you cannot opt out of, what is it that God is saying to you through this situation or through this person? Or what is it that he's doing in you through this situation or this person? And seeing this as an opportunity and as an opportunity for God to speak something to you that you maybe didn't hear before, or have having a moment with a child that you maybe didn't see coming. There's just ways that God is in these things for us, if we're open to seeing it as an opportunity, as opposed to just feeling the frustration of maybe our plans or our ideas being not what we hoped for, not what we expected.
Yeah, I feel hesitant to say this because I don't want to minimize what's going on. Obviously, there's so many serious fears and concerns, but I think there's some goodness in just seeing the other side of this. That every situation that we're in is ultimately a temporary situation, and even if this lockdown type thing has to continue for another year or 2 years, there is going to be another side of this, and our students are just going to be that much more equipped to handle a crisis and to respond to a difficult situation and to be an independent learner and to be responsible for what's happening in the world around them. And they're going to have learned from these really difficult times where they had to learn how to grieve and struggle and then come out the other side of it. And so again, I don't want to minimize what's happening, but just finding ways to be thankful for what's going on and to be thankful for the opportunity to learn how to do something really hard at a young age. This is something that I think is going to make this generation really strong, is that they've had to go through this and they've had to deal with something that was a global, unexpected phenomenon and come out the other side of it. And so just keeping that in mind, this is not forever.
That's great. And then the last thing I'll say, which was reiterated by one of our attendees, is that give yourself grace upon grace upon grace upon grace. The Instagram photos you see of like the perfect homeschool setups with like the chalkboard and everybody has, those aren't real.
It's all lies.
That's right, man. They were cleaning puke up off those desks before they took that picture. Give yourself grace to make mistakes, to be imperfect, to not hit an unreasonable standard, but put yourself in the position of a learner. You are learning as much as your students are right now, and that can be tremendously beneficial and life-giving. So I want to say again, thank you so much to all of our panelists. I really feel like we could keep going, but we want to respect your time and also keep this in a bite-sized piece. So why don't I close us in prayer and then we will sign off. Oh, before I do that, a little bit of just like housekeeping. If you registered for this call, we're going to send you an email later this week. It's going to have a recording of this that you could watch later or pass on to a friend. It's also going to have a resource page that has some books, some websites, and that you could use that our panelists have found helpful in their own professions or in their own schooling that they've done. So that'll be coming. Watch for that. And we would love it if you found this helpful and you can think of somebody that would benefit. Just send them the link. We'd love to have this go out as far as it's helpful. So with that said, let me close this in prayer. God, once again, we're thankful for the opportunity to learn, and we're thankful that in the midst of all of this, we find a tremendous amount of confidence in who you are, in your love for us, in your unending care, and in the knowledge that you are creating us to be agents of change and agents of transformation in our children's lives, in our spouses' lives, in other families' lives, in our students' lives. We're so thankful for that. Pray for your grace on this school season. Pray for your grace on the families who are navigating uncharted waters. We just pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great week.